John Edward Robinson, from Cicero, Illinois, USA, is a serial killer who is still alive and well. He's also known as the first serial killer on the internet. Since internet chat rooms let people from different places chat, meet, and date, he was the only one who used the internet's virtual nature to lure innocent people into his carefully laid death traps. His crimes were shocking because, as far as anyone could remember, he had a wife and children, lived an ordinary suburban life, and his gentle demeanor, always with a smile on his face, and willingness to chat like a friendly neighbor made it almost impossible for anyone to be wary of him. But the fraud, embezzlement, entrapment, kidnapping, sexual abuse, murders, and even hiding his victims in chemical barrels on his farm were the real him. It's only through his life story that we can really understand why he ended up committing crimes. John was born in Cicero, Illinois, on December 18, 1943. It was a pretty chaotic time there, and the area had a reputation for being a haven for criminals, as well as violent and racist elements. In the 1920s, Chicago gang leader Al Capone set up his headquarters in Cicero. In 1951, an African-American family tried to move into the area and were subjected to violence that sparked riots, and the family was eventually forced to leave. John's father was an alcoholic, and his mother kept a close eye on him. There are very few accounts of this, but it's easy to imagine the abuse he may have suffered when his father was drunk and his mother kept tabs on him, restricting his freedom and privacy. In 1957, John became a Boy Scout and was lucky enough to travel with a group of scouts who performed in front of Queen Elizabeth II in London, and he even got a kiss from actress and singer Judy Garland. A year later, he entered Quigley Preparatory Seminary, a private school for boys who want to become priests. Away from his controlling parents, he misbehaved a lot, did poorly in school, and often got into fights with his classmates, and also spent more time in the school's detention room than he did studying. So he was expelled after less than a year. 2 years later, at the nagging and advice of his parents, John enrolled at Morton Junior College in Cicero to study X-ray technology, the one program that was pretty much his future in crime. He studied at this school for 2 years, but was expelled for violating school rules and failed to get his license. John's murders didn't happen overnight. He spent his younger years honing his craft, perfecting his fraudulent skills. In 1964, he relocated to Kansas City, where he secured a position as an X-ray technician by presenting a forged credential. That same year, at the age of 21, he married a woman named Nancy Jo Lynch, and they had 4 children within 7 years. In 1966, he was fired from his job because he was lazy and incompetent, but he quickly found another position at a different medical clinic. In this job, he even had sex with staff and patients. In 1969, he was arrested for embezzling $33,000 from the clinic and sentenced to 3 years in prison and 3 years of probation. During the second year of his probation, he broke the rules by moving from Kansas City, where he was serving his sentence, to Chicago without permission. He then found a position as an insurance salesman with R.B. Jones. But once again, he was arrested for embezzling company funds, then returned to Kansas City and extended his probation. In 1975, he set up a fake medical consulting firm in Kansas City, which led to his sentence being extended for securities fraud and mail fraud. In 1977, he took a job with a disability services organization and managed to get on the board of directors. And immediately after, he forged a series of letters from leaders of charitable organizations and even the mayor of Kansas City complimenting him on his dedication to volunteerism, and then disguised himself as the organization's Person of the Year and hosted a meal to celebrate the honor. With this disguise, he completed his probation in 1979, but by 1980, he was again arrested on multiple charges, including embezzlement and check forgery, among others, and thus served 60 days in prison. His first step after being released from prison was to set up a bogus hydroponics company and then scammed out of $25,000 from a friend who had hoped for a quick return on his investment to pay for his life-threatening wife's medical bills. But alas, he was scammed. Boy Scout leader, Sunday school teacher, and sports team coach, 3 occupations that could not be timed with certainty except to confirm that he held them during his time in Kansas City. Perhaps during the 1980s, so as to fill in the gaps in John's life between 1980 and 1984, and perhaps he had been doing all of these jobs prior to his arrest. John has admitted to killing 8 people, but there may have been many more victims just waiting to be discovered. In 1984, he set up 2 fake companies, Equi Plus and Equi 2, and hired 19-year-old Paula Godfrey as a sales rep through an ad. At the time, she told her family and friends that John wanted her to go to Texas with a group of women for clerical skills training. On September 1st, John picked her up at her house in Overland Park, Kansas, and drove her to the airport for her flight. After that, she disappeared and never contacted her family again. Paula's father, sensing that something was wrong, confronted John, but he denied everything, so they filed a missing person report with the police. A few days later, Paula's parents got a letter from their daughter saying she was doing well and not to worry, with her own signature at the bottom. Since Paula was of legal age and there was no evidence of any wrongdoing, the police stopped investigating her disappearance. 3 months after Paula disappeared, just before Christmas 1984, John visited several shelters and hospitals in Kansas City to talk to social workers about a new program he was putting together. One social worker said in an interview that John told her the program was for women who had been bullied and oppressed, especially young mothers who were pregnant or had recently given birth. Its goal was to help them get back on their feet and find a stable place to live. After Christmas, the social worker got another call from John. He said he'd found a girl who was willing to take part in the program. Her name was Lisa Stassi, 19 years old, and also had a 4-month-old daughter. John told Lisa he'd get her a job in Chicago, find her an apartment, and take care of the child's daycare, among other things. Then he picked them up from a place Lisa had borrowed and checked them into a hotel that had been booked on January 10, 1985, for the night. Betty Stacy, Lisa's mother-in-law, said she got a call from Lisa, who was in tears. She said she had to sign 4 pieces of paper and Betty told her not to sign anything. During the call, Lisa calmed down and said, "They're coming," and then she hung up. That was the last time Betty spoke to her, and after that, Lisa disappeared. The police investigator said that Lisa's family had received a letter from her printed on a typewriter. The former administrator of the women's shelter also read a letter written to her by Lisa on January 10, 1985, in an ABC News interview. It said, "I want to thank you for all of your help. I have decided to leave this place and try to make a good life for me and my daughter." However, Lisa's mother said she couldn't spell a complete letter, let alone use a typewriter. A few days later, John called people who knew Lisa, saying that Lisa and her daughter had disappeared from the hotel and asking if they'd heard anything about Lisa. Lisa's daughter, Tiffany, wasn't dead, after all. After John was arrested for murder in 2000, the police started looking for the missing victims, which included Lisa's kids. The end result was pretty shocking. Lisa's daughter was a 15-year-old girl named Heather Robinson, who was raised by John's own brother's family. On January 10, 1985, John contacted his brother and sister-in-law. They had been unable to adopt a baby through the usual channels for many years. John told them that a young mother he knew had committed suicide, leaving a baby behind. He also told them to pay a $5,500 processing fee to an attorney's agency to proceed with the adoption as quickly as possible. The next day, on January 11th, John met with them with the baby and some fake adoption papers. After they swapped the babies, there was an Uncle John in Tiffany's life from then on. In an interview with ABC News in 2019, Tiffany said that she had a negative relationship with her uncle growing up. When she was a teenager, she found out that she was adopted and asked her adoptive parents about her birth mother. They didn't know anything about it and could only tell her about her adoption, so she had to turn to John. John invited Tiffany to his farm in Kansas City, telling her that she would know everything when she came. That was where it all started. Tiffany didn't show up because she was scared. When the reporter asked, "What do you think would have happened if you had shown up?" she replied, "I think I would have been killed and put in a barrel." Before the interview, Tiffany had visited the farm where John had placed the gasoline drum containing the body, accompanied by the police and the reporter. Her mother, Lisa's body, was not found there, but she still felt infinite darkness and fear as she walked the land. In January 1987, Catherine Frances Clampett, who was 27 at the time, left her kids with her parents, moved to Kansas City to live with her brother and his family. Not long after that, she saw an ad for EQ2, a management consulting firm that promised lots of travel and a brand new closet. John hired her, and on June 15, 1987, she left to meet him, and she hasn't been seen since, and the case of her disappearance is still pending. Between 1987 and 1993, John was convicted and jailed in Kansas for multiple fraud offenses and was later imprisoned again in Missouri for another fraud conviction and a parole violation. While he was serving his sentence at the West Missouri Correctional Facility, he met Beverly Bonner, a 49-year-old prison librarian. When he got out in January 1994, Bonner left her husband, who was a prison doctor, and moved to Kansas to work for John. After John set up a poo box in Kansas for her alimony check, her family never heard from her again. For years, Bonner's mother sent out her alimony checks, which were always cashed by John. Sheila Faith, a 45-year-old single mother, was devastated by the death of her husband and found it tough to raise her disabled 15-year-old daughter, Debbie Faith, on her own. She often turns to the internet as a way of finding relief from the pressure she's under. Once, she was drawn in by a man she met on a bad website. He painted a wonderful picture for her. "I'm a wealthy businessman. I'll take care of you and you can be my slave for the rest of your life. We'll travel all the time, go to exotic places, and live a wonderful life." Then Sheila fell so deeply in love with this man that she told her friends she and her daughter would move into his home in Kansas. Her friends were surprised by this sudden decision and warned her it was too risky, but she did not listen. In the summer of 1994, a man came to help her move, and after that, they were never seen again. In fact, shortly after Sheila left for Kansas, her brother received a letter from Sheila saying how happy she was. He was always suspicious, though, and asked Social Security to track his sister and niece through Debbie's disability Social Security checks, but the administrator wouldn't give him that information. In the fall of 1994, Social Security got a letter from Dr. William Bonner. He told them that Debbie was now totally disabled and needed to be cared for around the clock. He also said that her check would need to be increased, but none of the staff members involved thought anything was out of the ordinary. At the time in Kansas City, it was John who was claiming the guarantee in Sheila's name, but the mother and daughter were actually dead. Over time, John became more careless and sloppy, and in 1999, 2 more missing persons with ties to him were finally flagged by police in Kansas and Missouri. One of them, Izabela Lewicka, was born in Poland and moved with her family to the United States at the age of 15, and she started a strange lifestyle at the age of 19. In 1997, like Sheila, she connected with John through a website looking for a sex partner, and she moved from Indiana to Kansas City. Less than 9 months after she met John. She was already married, but he gave her an engagement ring and took her to the county registrar's office to get a marriage license. But this certificate was never picked up. Izabela also signed a slavery contract with 115 clauses. In 1999, she suddenly disappeared, and John told a web designer he had hired that Izabela had been arrested for marijuana use and deported. Later, Izabela's parents received a letter from her with her handwriting on it. After the arrest, John said he'd tell the innocent victims he was taking them on a trip around the world on his yacht. He said it would get hectic once the trip started, so they'd need to sign some blank paper before it started. And these signatures served the purpose of being sent by John to the victims' families after their deaths to minimize their suspicions. But the ruse didn't work on the victim, Suzette Troughton. It was her family that tipped off the authorities and led to John's arrest. In 1999, Suzette met a man named Junior in an online chat room who said he was a wealthy businessman from Kansas City. That man was John. After a few months of emailing back and forth, John made Suzette an offer to care for his diabetic father while he traveled around the world. She was tempted by the offer, but decided to meet with John and his father before making a decision, just to be on the safe side. She met with John in October, and he had some people act as members of his family to get her to relax. After 5 days, she accepted the job and officially moved there on February 14, 2000 to prepare for her new life. For the next 2 weeks, she rented an apartment using John's credit card, and then he would visit regularly and take pictures of the two of them. Suzette would then send these photos to her friend Crystal, but as of March 1st, the content of her emails changed a lot. Instead of talking about their friendship or the small details of her life, she would give exaggerated accounts of how great her life was and how happy her hosts made her. Crystal thinks the person who sent the email isn't her best friend when Suzette offers to introduce Crystal to a host so she can live the same happy life as Suzette. Crystal accepts the offer without moving and is soon contacted by a man claiming to be a strict but honorable host. She noticed that this man's emails were very similar to Suzette's, so she figured it was probably the same person. After chatting with this guy for a few weeks, Crystal gets a call from him. Then a new contact, Tom, shows up. He emails her and says he'd also like to be her host, and gives her a phone number where she can be reached at any time. Crystal then asked a police friend to trace the 3 men's calls, and each number eventually led to John. So she called the police, who in turn asked her to continue to follow up on the emails as usual, and monitored their email exchanges. By the end of March, John had called Suzette's mother. He told her that her daughter had turned down his job offer and had gone off with someone else to travel the world. During the call, Suzette's mother asked John if she should tell anyone about her daughter's disappearance. John said, "Honey, I really wouldn't worry too much about it. I'm sure they'll send us a card, phone call, email, or something when they get to their next destination." But she'd already decided that John was lying after that phone call, Then, Suzette's sister contacted the police and asked them to find her sister's 2 dogs. She said Suzette would never go anywhere, much less travel, without the 2 dogs. In the end, after a police search, they found the 2 dogs in a trawler park where John had lived. They'd been abandoned on the same day that Suzette disappeared. While looking for Suzette, the officers found out that she and John had stayed at a hotel in February. The medical examiner found blood in their room, but couldn't figure out where it came from. John, who was under police surveillance, checked into room 120 of the Extended Stay America Hotel on April 23rd with an anonymous woman from Dallas. 5 days later, John told the woman to go back to Dallas and pack for a move to Kansas, which he had promised to help her with, but he didn't show up at the agreed-upon time. So the woman was unable to reach him, and because John had taken a number of intimate photographs of the woman and she wanted them back, she told the agents who came to question her about the incident. On May 19, 2000, John was again accused by an anonymous woman. She told the police that John had repeatedly beaten her and forced her to take the photographs. Thankfully, John left when she began to resist. But Suzette was not so lucky. During the trial, the jury was shown a video. The video showed John in a hotel room with Suzette. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking into the camera lens. She told John, "This is what you want me to tell you. I am your slave. Everything I am is yours." And then, for 40 minutes, the video showed John sexually abusing her. At the end of the video, John told her that the most important thing in life is that she is his slave. Ultimately, she was killed by John in the same way as the other 4 women whose bodies were found, with 1 or 2 blows to the head. In late January 2001, Missouri State's Attorney Chris Koster charged John with 56 counts of forgery, including Sheila's and Debbie's Social Security checks. If only count the forgery counts, he was also facing 382 years of incarceration. On September 16, 2002, John was tried in court for the murders of Isabella, Lisa, and Suzette. The police had a lot of evidence against John, including more than 23,000 ciphers and over 100 witnesses. They also found about 18 hammers in his personal belongings. These were sent to a lab for examination, but the technicians couldn't determine which of the hammers were the murder weapon. John's wife also testified that she knew her husband had had sex with other women using aliases, and admitted that he thoroughly enjoyed his perverted lifestyle. The defense team filed an appeal at the last minute, saying that the prosecution's evidence was slow to be released, but it didn't help. On October 29, 2002, the jury reached a guilty verdict in less than a day, and in January 2003, John was sentenced to death. The death penalty in Missouri is much harsher than in Kansas. The Missouri prosecutor insisted that John had to lead the police to Lisa, Paula, and Catherine as part of the plea bargain. However, this would have constituted a guilty plea, which could then have been used against him in Kansas. Therefore, John refused. It became clear that if John didn't cooperate, the 3 women who were brutally murdered would never be found. In the end, in October 2003, in a carefully written plea, John admitted that the prosecution had enough evidence to warrant a death sentence, so he agreed to the plea without providing any information. His statement was technically an admission of guilt, but it was clear that he didn't show any remorse or accept responsibility. In November 2015, the Kansas Supreme Court overturned the convictions of Suzette and Lisa for murder due to a technicality, but upheld John's conviction and death sentence for Isabella. This means that it was only a matter of time before John would have been executed anyway, and he remains on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, awaiting his execution.